Hi, I was able to collect 170 mysterious historical photos for you that you might have missed. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. I will be very grateful to you. Soviet troops storm a German fortified position near Poltava in September 1943, racing past a burning Panther tank. The attack came during the Soviet drive toward the Dnieper, which forced German forces to retreat across eastern Ukraine. Baker exploded 27 meters beneath Bikini Atoll on July 25, 1946, instantly destroying the landing craft above it. The blast hurled a giant radioactive water column over the target fleet, sinking several ships and contaminating many survivors beyond recovery. In 1988, designers at the Gorky automobile plant examined a full-size wooden model of a new light commercial van. Their work eventually led to the Gazelle, which entered production in 1994 and became one of Russia's most recognizable vehicles. Frederick Fleet was the 24-year-old lookout who first spotted the iceberg that sank the Titanic in 1912. After surviving the disaster and serving in both World Wars, he died by suicide in 1965. In 1925, young women turned bare knees into tiny canvases, painting them with faces, flowers, and bold designs. The craze spread as shorter skirts exposed the knee, transforming a once-hidden body part into a shocking symbol of freedom. Pedro Rodriguez prepares to race the Gulf Porsche 917K at the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1970. After falling 12 laps behind, he, Leo Kinnunen, and Joe Siffert fought back to finish fourth. Around 1910 in Alaska, an Inuit medicine man wore a carved mask and giant wooden hands while treating a sick boy. The ritual was believed to drive evil spirits from the child's body. On March 23, 1951, Operation Tomahawk sent 120 transport planes over Korea under the protection of 16 fighters. More than 3,000 American paratroopers jumped behind enemy lines, making it the war's largest one-day airborne assault. John F. Kennedy pretends to meet Marilyn Monroe for the first time at his birthday party on May 19, 1962. Less than 3 months later, Monroe was dead, and Kennedy was assassinated the following year. In 1963, Life photographed Steve McQueen hammering a heavy bag during one of his intense daily workouts. He trained for 2 hours every day, lifting weights, running, and boxing to build the lean physique that made him Hollywood's king of cool. During the filming of Let's Make Love in 1960, Marilyn Monroe shared coffee with a crew handyman named Gil. She reportedly loved his coffee so much that she gave him a signed photo reading, "To Gil, there is nothing like your coffee, Marilyn Monroe." Dan Blocker stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and once weighed 365 pounds, making him look enormous beside almost anyone. By his death in 1972, he weighed about 250 pounds and died from a pulmonary embolism after gallbladder surgery. Athelia was a famous Mexican sideshow performer with microcephaly, falsely advertised as the last survivor of an ancient Yucatan tribe. Known for her dancing and constant smile, she loved watching embroidery and became especially popular with children. In 1976, Kenyans protested after Ugandan dictator Idi Amin claimed part of their country, with one sign demanding his return to a mental hospital. Kenya deployed troops near the border, and Amin quickly abandoned his threat. On October 7, 1959, the Soviet Luna 3 spacecraft captured humanity's first view of the moon's hidden far side. Its grainy images revealed unknown mountains and the dark Mare Moscoviense, proving the unseen hemisphere looked very different from the familiar side. Russian explorer Nikolai Miklukho-Maklay poses with a young Papuan in New Guinea in 1874. The locals called him the White Papuan after he lived among them, learned their language, and defended them from slavery. This letter was written aboard Titanic on April 13, 1912, just 1 day before the ship struck the iceberg. Its author calmly promised, "We will arrive in New York on Wednesday," unaware that Titanic would never reach the city. Grace McDaniel became a famous sideshow performer after facial tumors dramatically changed her appearance as she aged. Behind the shocking image, she was known as a kind mother figure, married farmer Harry McDaniel, and had a son named Elmer. Mitsubishi Zero fighters sit at Lakunai Airfield in Rabaul as the Tabarvur volcano erupts behind them. Japan turned this volcanic harbor into its strongest base in the South Pacific, but constant Allied bombing eventually made its aircraft nearly useless. Inside Kennedy Space Center's firing room, controllers watch Apollo 11 lift off on July 16, 1969. Just 12 minutes later, the astronauts were orbiting Earth and preparing for humanity's first crewed moon landing. This rare photo from the Soviet Union in the 1930s shows a horse-drawn mobile medical station beside a railway construction site. It stayed close to the workers because serious injuries were common, allowing medics to provide emergency treatment before victims could reach a hospital. In 1966, Vietnamese civilians were forced to walk ahead of an armed patrol as human mine detectors. Their lives became the only protection against hidden mines and booby traps. In 1945, former heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey posed with his mother while biting into a watermelon packed with large black seeds. Seedless watermelons only became widely available decades later after breeders developed fruit with tiny, soft seeds. On August 14, 1945, reporters sprinted across the White House after President Truman announced Japan's surrender and the end of World War II. They were racing for the telephones because breaking the biggest news on Earth depended on who called first. On May 12, 1926, the Massachusetts Supreme Court denied Sacco and Vanzetti a new trial after their murder convictions in the South Braintree payroll robbery. Police guarded the courthouse as protests spread worldwide, driven by claims that prejudice and politics had condemned the two immigrants. In 1950s Bangkok, canals served as roads, and floating markets brought food and household goods directly to riverside homes. Children grew up beside the water, while traders navigated crowded waterways in narrow wooden boats. In 1919, 11-year-old Kale Campbell picked up to 125 pounds of cotton a day in Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma. Asked about the brutal work, she simply said, "I do not like it very much." In August 1944, fresh blood arrived in Normandy by transport plane and was rushed by truck to hospitals near the front. Donated by American civilians, it gave thousands of wounded Allied soldiers a chance to survive injuries that had once meant certain death. In 1928, museum worker A.P. Levashova walked a leashed wolf from the museum zoo through snowy Omsk. The calm scene looks ordinary, but her companion was a powerful wild predator, not a dog. A special effects artist smooths Pearl's artificial skin during the filming of Blade in 1998. The obese vampire was created with a massive prosthetic body that transformed actor Eric Edwards beyond recognition. In August 1991, crowds watched a crane remove the statue of Felix Dzerzhinsky, founder of the Soviet secret police, from Moscow's Lubyanka Square. The removal came after the failed coup against Mikhail Gorbachev and became a powerful symbol of collapsing Soviet rule. Mujahideen fighters watch a Soviet convoy from a hidden position in Nuristan, Afghanistan in 1979. The region's narrow mountain roads made Soviet vehicles easy targets for sudden ambushes. In 1913, future First Lady Claudia Alta Taylor sat in the arms of her nurse, Alice Tittle, in Karnak, Texas. Tittle said the baby was as pretty as a ladybird, giving her the nickname Lady Bird for life. In September 1966, North Vietnamese photographer Mai Nam captured an American F-105 falling from the sky near Vinh Phuc, north of Hanoi. The pilot ejected moments before the crash and opened his parachute as the burning warplane plunged toward the ground. On September 13, 1987, two scavengers opened an abandoned medical device in Goiânia, Brazil, exposing glowing radioactive cesium powder. 4 people died and 249 were contaminated in one of the world's worst radiological accidents outside a nuclear power plant. From 1904 to 1908, German colonial forces drove Herero and Nama people into the desert, poisoned water sources, and imprisoned survivors in concentration camps. Around 65,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama died from shootings, thirst, starvation, disease, and forced labor. On July 17, 1964, Canada detonated 500 tons of TNT in Alberta during Operation Snowball. The massive blast helped military scientists study how nuclear explosions could affect equipment, structures, and the surrounding landscape. Japanese soldiers inspect the wreckage of an American B-29 superfortress shot down during a raid on Tokyo in 1945. In the foreground, the crash has twisted a Browning M2 machine gun into a dramatic curve. From 1917 to 1920, the Black Avengers gang terrorized Moscow and killed dozens of people. Police officers were their main targets, making every encounter with the gang potentially deadly. In 1945, German prisoners in France were held inside open-air punishment cells made from rings of corrugated metal. Guards could watch from above, while the prisoners had almost no shelter, privacy, or room to escape the summer heat. Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova, the first man and woman in space, posed together in the 1960s. Gagarin is playfully holding her ear, but the story behind this strange moment remains unknown. This photograph shows an unexploded German parachute mine in 1940, alongside one made safe by bomb disposal experts. Designed to descend silently by parachute, these huge naval mines could destroy entire buildings with a single blast. In Berlin in 1945, women known as Trümmerfrauen cleared mountains of rubble while the city faced mass starvation. Their second-tier ration cards were worth more than their wages, while housewives and the elderly received the lowest card, grimly nicknamed the cemetery ticket. On December 7, 1941, Japan sent 353 aircraft to attack Pearl Harbor in 2 waves. The surprise assault killed 2,403 Americans, damaged or destroyed 19 United States ships, and pushed America into the Second World War. 2 Afghan farmers worked beneath the Great Buddha of Bamiyan, a 55-meter statue carved into the cliff around the 6th century. The Taliban destroyed it with explosives in March 2001, erasing a monument that had survived for nearly 15 centuries. Afghan communist soldiers parade through Kabul after the Sour Revolution on April 27, 1978. During the coup, rebels stormed the presidential palace, killed President Mohammad Daoud Khan and much of his family, and placed the Soviet-backed People's Democratic Party in power. Romanian legionary police members posed with pistols beside a motorcycle in 1940. The force was dissolved that November after repeated violence, hooliganism, and clashes with Romania's professional police. On May 10, 1926, striking miners sabotaged the railway at Cramlington to stop a coal train. Instead, they derailed the Flying Scotsman carrying 281 passengers, but remarkably, no one was killed. On August 7, 1974, Philippe Petit secretly walked a wire more than 400 meters above New York between the World Trade Center towers. With no safety rope, he stayed there for about 45 minutes, crossed 8 times, and was arrested after stepping off. British forces erected this sign at Bergen-Belsen in May 1945, recording 10,000 unburied bodies and another 13,000 deaths. Soon afterward, they burned the camp to stop a deadly typhus epidemic. On October 7, 1959, Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 captured humanity's first view of the Moon's far side. Its 29 photographs revealed a landscape with far fewer dark plains than the familiar side, transforming lunar maps forever. This photograph shows the first Soviet atomic bomb exploding in Kazakhstan on August 29, 1949, just 2 seconds after detonation. Taken only 5 kilometers from ground zero, it captured a blast nearly as powerful as the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. This strange 1936 photograph shows Joseph Goebbels grinning behind Hitler as he signs a book at Munich's Sternecker-Bräu. It was not the first photobomb. The Nazis were visiting the room that had housed their party's first office in 1920. In 1986, the final day of the Ocean Pacific Pro Surfing Championship in Huntington Beach exploded into a massive riot. The crowd attacked police, stormed a lifeguard station, and burned 5 police vehicles, causing more than $150,000 in damage. This United States government photograph from 1922 shows a soldier testing an early gas mask with a breathing hose connected to a chest-mounted filter. Published in Practical Physics, the image reveals how bulky protection against poison gas remained after the First World War. Dick Van Dyke, famous as Rob Petrie, stands beside Fred Gwynne in full costume as Herman Munster. Gwynne was 6 feet 5 inches tall, but the monster makeup and heavy platform boots made him look even more enormous. This striking photograph from the 1920s shows a prominent Asian man with extraordinarily long fingernails. Such nails were a powerful sign of wealth and status because they proved their owner never performed manual labor. Soviet soldiers posed beside one of Afghanistan's giant Bamiyan Buddhas, carved into the cliff around the 6th century. The Taliban destroyed the ancient statue with explosives in March 2001, leaving only the enormous empty niche behind. Louis Daguerre captured this view of Paris in 1838 during an exposure lasting several minutes. Moving crowds vanished, but one man stood still long enough while having his shoes polished, becoming the first known person photographed. At least 42 assassination attempts were reportedly made against Adolf Hitler, including several before he seized power. A political rival tried to shoot him during a street brawl in 1921. Nazis were poisoned in 1932, and a mysterious man in an SS uniform allegedly targeted him in 1937. Phineas Gage holds the iron rod that blasted through his skull in an 1848 accident. He survived, but reports of dramatic personality changes helped transform scientists' understanding of how the brain shapes behavior. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 struck Mount Erebus during an Antarctic sightseeing trip, killing all 257 people aboard. Investigators later found that altered flight coordinates had unknowingly directed the crew toward the mountain. In 1962, identical twins Bobby Jean and Betty Jo Eller were separated inside a North Carolina psychiatric hospital. Within hours, both died in different wards, and even the FBI could not determine why. German soldiers escort captured Jewish civilians to a collection point during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in May 1943. Most prisoners were deported to forced labor and death camps, while thousands were killed during the brutal suppression. In the 1950s, Las Vegas hotels sold rooftop parties where guests watched atomic bombs explode about 65 miles away. Casinos even created atomic cocktails and beauty contests, turning nuclear tests into one of the city's strangest tourist attractions. On April 7, 1926, Irish aristocrat Violet Gibson shot Mussolini at close range, but the bullet only grazed his nose. Deported without trial, she spent her final 30 years in a British psychiatric hospital. On Thanksgiving Day in 1900, football fans climbed onto a San Francisco glass factory roof to watch Berkeley play Stanford for free. The roof collapsed, dropping dozens into the factory beside a furnace holding 14 tons of molten glass. On April 1, 1984, Marvin Gaye Sr. fatally shot his son after an argument over missing insurance papers. The legendary singer died one day before his 45th birthday, and his father later received probation after pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter. An Illinois National Guardsman questions a driver during the violent protests outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968. Thousands of troops and police flooded the city as anti-Vietnam War demonstrators faced tear gas, beatings, and mass arrests. In 1958, 14-year-old Cheryl Crane fatally stabbed Johnny Stompanato while he fought with her mother, Hollywood star Lana Turner. Stompanato was an abusive boyfriend and an enforcer for mobster Mickey Cohen, and a coroner's jury later ruled the killing justifiable homicide. In 1916, Ernest Shackleton rescued every member of his crew after their ship was crushed by Antarctic ice, and they survived nearly 2 years in brutal conditions. All 28 men returned alive, making the failed expedition one of history's greatest survival stories. Marilyn Monroe gives the ceremonial kickoff at a charity soccer match between the United States and Israel at Ebbets Field on May 12, 1957. The packed Brooklyn Stadium watched one of Hollywood's biggest stars launch the match. On February 14, 1942, a Japanese pilot painted a victory mark on his Zero fighter after combat in the Pacific. Beside him, a real monkey served as the unit mascot, creating one of the war's most unusual squadron photographs. In the winter of 1968, snow buried Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk so deeply that traffic lights stood almost at ground level. Residents still crossed the city on foot, walking through trenches carved between towering snowdrifts. After the 1996 Port Arthur massacre killed 35 people and wounded 23, Australia rapidly tightened its gun laws. This photo shows part of the roughly 650,000 firearms surrendered and destroyed during the national buyback. Unemployed men picketed in New York City in 1909, demanding work after the Panic of 1907. Their signs called for equal rights, public jobs, and justice as the financial crisis left thousands desperate. In 1914, the industrial workers of the world rallied in New York after the Ludlow Massacre, where striking miners and their families were killed. One man carried a chilling choice in his hat: bread or revolution. On New Year's Eve in 1938, Adolf Hitler played Kegeln beside Eva Braun at his mountain retreat in Bavaria. Kegeln is a traditional German 9-pin game and the European ancestor of modern 10-pin bowling. This rare photograph shows captured How fighters of the Pi Marir faith near Napier in November 1865. The prisoners sit under armed colonial guard after joining a movement that mixed Maori spirituality with fierce resistance to British rule. In 1984, tens of thousands of miners crowded into Brazil's Serra Pelada mine, digging for gold with basic tools. They carried heavy sacks up dangerous wooden ladders while armed guards controlled access to the pit. In 1952, a truck crashed through the pavement after the ground beneath it suddenly collapsed. The huge hole swallowed the cab and left the rear wheels hanging high above the street. These shattered windows belong to Jewish-owned shops in Berlin after Kristallnacht on November 10, 1938. Nazi-led violence killed 91 Jews, destroyed thousands of businesses and synagogues, and sent about 30,000 Jewish men to concentration camps. Gavrilo Princip's parents stand outside their modest home in Bosnia, unaware that their son would soon change history. In 1914, he assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, setting off the crisis that plunged Europe into the First World War. In 1986, more than 50,000 men labored at Brazil's Serra Pelada mine, hauling heavy sacks of earth up dangerous wooden ladders in search of gold. With almost no machinery, the vast pit became one of the most brutal gold rushes ever photographed. A mother searches for her son as Soviet troops return through Termez, Uzbekistan on February 15, 1989. That day, the last Soviet forces crossed the Friendship Bridge from Afghanistan, ending a war that had lasted more than 9 years. In 1970, Pranas Brzezinskas and his son Algirdas hijacked a Soviet passenger plane to Turkey, killing a flight attendant and wounding 3 others. Turkey refused Soviet demands to extradite them, and Pranas served only 4 years of his 8-year sentence after an amnesty. Children worked long shifts inside this Baltimore packing factory in 1909, often for only a few cents. Photographs like this helped expose child labor and push the United States towards stronger protections for young workers. An Indian yogi rests on a bed of sharp nails in 1907, using extreme pressure control to remain motionless. Such displays helped yogis demonstrate discipline over pain and attracted shocked crowds worldwide. A grandfather teaches his grandson to walk at the Manzanar incarceration camp in 1942. Dorothea Lange documented life there, but the United States government suppressed many of her photographs for decades. Ho Chi Minh, leader of the Vietnamese Revolution and the country's first president, pulls a fishing net during a visit to fishermen in Than Hoa. The unusual photograph shows one of Asia's most powerful political figures barefoot and working beside an ordinary fisherman. Budapest, February 1945. A German DFS-230 glider crashed into an apartment building while trying to land supplies for the surrounded German forces. The pilot, Georg Filius, was killed, leaving the aircraft hanging from the shattered wall. This German propaganda photo from summer 1941 claimed that Ukrainians welcomed Waffen-SS soldiers with food and drinks. The men were reportedly from the Wiking Division, but the staged image reveals nothing about what the villagers truly felt. In 1966, an American Douglas A-1 Skyraider struck North Vietnamese positions with white phosphorus bombs. Burning on contact with air, the chemical scattered countless flaming particles that produced thick smoke and caused devastating injuries. Viet Cong fighters concealed these pungy pits along jungle patrol routes, where sharpened bamboo stakes could pierce a soldier's feet and legs. Some stakes were coated with human waste, increasing the risk of severe infection and making even a non-fatal wound far more dangerous. In 1977, children stopped with their bicycles to watch a wildfire tear through La Tuna Canyon in California. This haunting photograph, preserved in the Los Angeles Times archive, captures how dangerously close they stood to the advancing flames. In 1927, these women lined up in Los Angeles for the Miss Correct Posture contest, where judges examined how straight they stood. The unusual competition was sponsored by the National Chiropractic Association, turning spinal alignment into a public beauty standard. In Vietnam in 1966, a crew landed their UH-1 Huey directly in a stream to wash off mud and grime. The unusual cleaning spot also kept the helicopter away from the dust clouds that damaged engines and rotor parts. German women broke through the security line to reach President John Kennedy during his visit to West Berlin in June 1963. The dramatic welcome came on the same day he delivered his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. In 1977, a boy watched Space Shuttle Enterprise travel overland through California on its way to Edwards Air Force Base. The shuttle never flew in space, but its glide tests proved that astronauts could land a spacecraft like an airplane. In March 1968, a United States Navy corpsman pressed a stethoscope to the ground in Vietnam. He was listening for movement inside hidden Viet Cong tunnels beneath the battlefield. In 1950s, Ukraine collective farm workers received grain and other goods based on labor days instead of a regular wage. Each labor day had a set value, but poor harvests could leave families with almost nothing after a year of work. Israeli women trained on a tank in 1978, when most female soldiers were still barred from combat roles. That restriction began to fall in the 1990s, opening elite military positions once reserved for men. These experimental American boots had soles shaped like bare feet, pointing backward, designed to confuse enemy trackers during the Vietnam War. The trick rarely worked because experienced trackers also followed broken plants, disturbed soil, and scent. Palestinian women trained with rifles at a Palestine Liberation Organization camp in Jordan in 1968, 1 year after the Six-Day War. 2 years later, Jordan's army crushed the organization's armed presence and forced its fighters out of the country. A British milkman delivers fresh milk during a major flood in 1954, carrying glass bottles through deep water. Even the private no parking sign was nearly submerged, but his daily route continued. Naples, 1908. A street vendor serves spaghetti to hungry customers. For centuries, pasta was cheap street food in Naples, and people traditionally ate long strands with their bare hands. Virginia Hill carried mob money across the country and became the lover of feared gangster Bugsy Siegel. This photo shows her at the Kefauver hearings in 1951, shortly before she fled to Europe and vanished from the criminal underworld. Astrakhan, 1911. Persian porters carry enormous sacks from a ship by hand. The rare photograph by Zachary Vinogradov captures the brutal physical labor behind trade across the Caspian Sea. Levi Strauss opened a San Francisco dry goods business in 1853, but it did not yet make blue jeans. That breakthrough came 20 years later when Strauss and tailor Jacob Davis patented copper-riveted work pants. In 1996, workers in Alang, India, dismantled 2 Soviet space tracking ships sold for scrap by Ukraine. Academic Sergei Korolev and cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin once used giant antennas to communicate with spacecraft far beyond Soviet ground stations. This iron cage is a mort safe, built to stop body snatchers from digging up fresh corpses and selling them to anatomy schools. Scottish families locked it over a grave for about 6 weeks until the body was too decayed to steal. In a Panamanian prison in 1920, inmates were reportedly lowered over a cliff inside a cage made of ropes. One broken knot could turn imprisonment into a fatal fall. Palestinian women confront an armed Israeli soldier during the First Intifada, which began in 1987. Women played a major role in the uprising, organizing protests, medical aid, food networks, and secret schools, while thousands of Palestinians were arrested. This good boy caught rats in the trenches during the First World War, where infestations spread disease and contaminated food. The chilling 1917 photograph shows dozens of his kills lined up for inspection. Havana, 1933. A charcoal worker stares into the camera, his face darkened by years of dust and smoke. Charcoal fueled countless Cuban kitchens, while the men who made and carried it endured exhausting work for little pay. In Beirut in 1987, boys collected spent bullet casings from streets and sold the metal to factories. The original caption claimed the brass returned as new ammunition, feeding Lebanon's endless civil war. In 1918, airship crews crossed frozen skies in open, unheated gondolas, exposed to brutal wind and temperatures far below freezing. A single engine failure, gas leak, or spark near the hydrogen could turn the flight into a disaster within seconds. This 1911 photograph by Carl Bulla shows workers making balloons and weather balloons at the Triangle Rubber Factory in St. Petersburg. The giant rubber envelopes were assembled by hand years before aircraft became common in Russia. On February 9, 1916, Lizzie the Elephant hauled a heavy machine through Sheffield for a wartime munitions factory. She replaced horses taken by the Army and reportedly moved loads weighing several tons. United Church of Christ chaplain Eugene W. Scott visits a wounded soldier at the 24th Evacuation Hospital in Long Binh, Vietnam. Military chaplains entered hospital wards without weapons, offering comfort to troops facing severe injuries far from home. A police officer arrests a young woman during the violent crackdown on student protesters in Czechoslovakia on November 17, 1989. Public outrage over the attack triggered the Velvet Revolution, which ended more than 4 decades of communist rule. In 1929, an Ethiopian priest drank a stimulating herbal brew before performing a ritual to identify a thief. With his eyes closed, he tied a rope to the accuser and supposedly guided him straight toward the suspected criminal. This photograph was used to advertise a French brothel around 1900, showing customers exactly what awaited inside. At a time when prostitution was officially regulated in France, licensed brothels openly promoted their women through provocative photographs like this one. Ivory traders pose with elephant tusks in Africa's Great Lakes region during the 1880s. Each pair came from a dead elephant, and the ivory was exported for piano keys, combs, and billiard balls. These arrest photos show IRA members Reginald Dunn and Joseph O'Sullivan after they shot Field Marshal Henry Wilson outside his London home in 1922. The assassination triggered a political crisis that pushed Ireland toward civil war, and both men were later hanged. A massive bust of Vladimir Lenin sits behind the railing of an apartment building stairwell in Kujan, Tajikistan. Once displayed as a symbol of Soviet power, the giant stone head now hides beneath a crumbling ceiling inside an ordinary residential block. A navigator plots the short Stirling's course during a wartime mission, surrounded by charts, cables, and instruments. With no satellite navigation, one small calculation error could send the heavy bomber miles off target or leave it dangerously short of fuel. In 1954, a Texas couple held their wedding underwater inside a glass viewing tank at the Marine Theater. The bride, groom, and witnesses smoked cigarettes beneath the surface using special diving helmets filled with trapped air. Sergeant Stubby served for 18 months in the First World War, warning soldiers of mustard gas and finding wounded men. He survived 17 battles, returned home as a hero, and died peacefully in 1926. Sylvester H. Roper built a steam-powered bicycle that may have been the first motorcycle. In 1896, the 72-year-old inventor suffered a heart attack and crashed during a speed trial, but nobody knows which happened first. Patients take part in a dance session at a New York psychiatric hospital in 1922. Decades before modern dance therapy was formally developed, hospitals used music and movement to encourage exercise, social contact, and emotional expression. In Victorian London, toshers searched filthy sewers for lost coins, jewelry, bones, and scrap metal. Sewer hunting was banned in 1840, but many secretly continued because one lucky find could equal several days of wages. In 1962, 3 prisoners fooled Alcatraz guards by placing fake heads in their beds before escaping through the walls. The heads were made from soap, toilet paper, toothpaste, cement dust, and real human hair. These men appear to be sleeping over a rope in a penny hang, a cheap shelter where poor guests could rest for the night. But the shocking truth is that they were actors recreating the practice for the film The Great Train Robbery. This photograph is often said to show frightened Whitechapel prostitutes around 1888, when Jack the Ripper terrorized London. But their identities, emotions, and even the image's connection to the murders remain unverified. Soviet soldiers fire a victory salute after retaking Sevastopol from German forces on May 9, 1944. The city was liberated exactly 1 year before Victory Day, after a brutal offensive that trapped thousands of Axis troops in Crimea. A German A-7V crew poses beside its armored giant in 1918, one of only 20 ever built. The A-7V carried up to 25 men and fought Britain's Mark IV in history's first tank-versus-tank battle. This haunting shadow was burned into stone by the atomic blast over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. The intense flash bleached the steps around a person, leaving behind a dark silhouette whose identity remains unknown. This 1,000-year-old wooden chest from Gotland held a blacksmith's complete toolkit. Its locks, hammers, tongs, saws, files, and metalworking tools survived from the Viking Age. This mother and her 9 children were living in a field beside United States Highway 70 near the Tennessee River in March 1936. Their torn clothes and feed sack garments reveal how brutally the Great Depression hit rural American families. Odessa residents build barricades from logs, sandbags, scrap metal, and broken machinery in August 1941. The city resisted Romanian and German forces for more than 2 months before Soviet troops evacuated by sea. Soviet villagers watch a motion picture for the first time in 1924. Their stunned faces capture how shocking moving images seem to people who had never seen a film. These miners display the gold washed from a Klondike claim in just 15 days in 1897. The heavy bags show why the gold rush drew thousands north, even though most prospectors never found a fortune. During the First World War, this British soldier wore a knitted vest that doubled as a draftsboard. Its 64 squares turned a simple piece of clothing into a portable game for life between battles. In the early 1980s, American auto workers smashed a Toyota with sledgehammers as Japanese imports threatened their jobs. The Union sign demanded one thing: cars sold in America should also be built in America. These 42 giant presidential busts were left to decay in a muddy Virginia field after President's Park closed in 2010. Contractor Howard Hankins was ordered to crush them, but saved every statue instead, even though cranes cracked their heads and necks during the move. In the early 1910s, Francesco de Bernocchi demonstrated his wireless iconograph, an early ancestor of the fax that transmitted messages and images. He patented the machine in 1912, decades before fax technology became widely used. In this rare photograph from the 1980s, Qusay Hussein, Saddam Hussein's younger son, fires a revolver into the air at a party. He later controlled Iraq's elite Republican Guard and became one of the regime's most feared figures. In 1911, the Austin Dam in Pennsylvania burst and unleashed millions of gallons of water on the town below. The flood killed at least 78 people and crushed entire buildings into heaps of timber. Two female prospectors head toward the Klondike goldfields, joining thousands who risked freezing trails, disease, and starvation for a chance to strike gold. Canadian authorities required every traveler to carry nearly 1 year of supplies before crossing into the Yukon. In 1944, the fuel tanks of the B-24H Liberator Little Warrior exploded after German anti-aircraft fire tore into the bomber. The crew had only seconds to escape before the burning aircraft fell from the sky. In 1955, the United States built a fake Nevada town filled with mannequin families to test an atomic bomb. This military camera captured the instant the nuclear flash hit the house, moments before the heat and shock wave destroyed everything inside. South African volunteer soldiers celebrate Christmas in the Italian mountains with bottles of local wine in 1944. Far from home and surrounded by snow, they enjoyed a brief break before returning to the brutal Allied advance through Italy. On May 7, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson toured Appalachia to expose the severe poverty hidden across rural America. His visit helped promote the War on Poverty, which expanded food aid, health care, education, and job programs for struggling families. Staff Sergeant George W. Talbert keeps watch in a Belgian forest during the Battle of the Bulge on December 19, 1944. Less than a month later, the 24-year-old soldier from Dubuque, Iowa, was killed in action. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. I will be very grateful to you.